Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Zach Dubuque. I'm the Operations and Logistics Manager for Book Passage. I'm very excited to introduce this special event. It's always such a privilege to get to listen to Mark Nepo and Brooke Warner. We're here today to talk to Mark and Brooke about Mark's new book, The Fifth Season, which offers Mark's wise and gentle insights on growing older, helping readers identify the second half of life as a turning point, a time of integration, transformation that guides us in making sense of our experiences. All seasons lead to this season, and all experiences lead to understanding of that experience. Let me introduce our speakers. Today we have Mark Nepo, who is a #1 New York Times bestselling author. His books, including The Book of Awakening, The One Life We're Given, and Drinking from the River of Light, have all been translated into more than 20 languages. Mark has appeared several times with Oprah Winfrey on her Super Soul Sunday program. In 2015, he was given the Life Achievement Award by Age Nation, and in 2016, he was named by Watkins Mind, Body, Spirit as one of the 100 most spiritually influential living people. Joining Mark today is Brooke Warner. She is the publisher of She Writes Press and Spark Press, president of Warner Coaching Inc., and author of Write On Sisters, Greenlight Your Book, What's Your Book, and 3 books on memoir. Brooke is a TEDx speaker, a weekly podcaster of Right Minded with co-host Grant Faulkner of NaNoWriMo, and the former executive editor of Seal Press. She writes a regular column for Publishers Weekly. Please join me in welcoming Brooke Warner and Mark Nepo.
Thank you, everyone. I am starting. I get to do a little further introduction of my good friend Mark. So, welcome, everyone. I'm Brooke Warner. I'm so honored to be here virtually with Book Passage. Like I said, my dear friend Mark, my colleague Mark Nepo, in celebration of his most recent book, The Fifth Season, Creativity in the Second Half of Life. Congratulations, Mark, to start, just to hear your voice before I go on a little more.
Oh, thank you so much, Brooke. It's a joy to be with you and to be part of Book Passage's series, as always.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have the opportunity to do this. We both love Book Passage so much. We want to encourage you to buy the fifth season through Book Passage. They ship anywhere and everywhere. We always want to thank Book Passage for creating this space. All of the virtual events they do are incredible. I imagine some of you are repeat attendees, and so thank you for being here. And again, thank you to Book Passage. I do just want to also say a couple more things about Mark. I mean, everyone out there may have come to him through the Book of Awakening, which is his New York Times best-selling book that has sold over 1 million copies. And there are so many more books. Mark is one of the most prolific authors I know, one of the most profound authors I know. And I've just had the gift of working with Mark now for 14 years, supporting him with various events, and just having this gift of being an early reader. I do want to say a bit more about the fifth season, but I also want to set up the event a little bit to say Mark and I are going to be in conversation for about 30 minutes. And then Mark is going to be reading for around 40 minutes. And then the balance will be Q&A. So please put your questions in even as we go, and Zach will collect those, and I'll put the questions forward to Mark at the end. The fifth season, miraculously, is Mark's 27th book. When I first read it, I was reminded just how much he meets the thresholds that we face in living. And like I said, I feel so honored, Mark, to be an early reader of your books. And this one in particular is so profound and so meaningful in this, notion of exploring the second half of life. And, so many of us bumping up against our sufferings and, trying to figure out how to live the rest of this life with more ease and, coming into the things that we care about. For those of you who know and love Mark's work, and you know what a tremendous storyteller he is, this is just one of these books that when I read it, I felt more calm. He invites you to drop into deep moments of truth and to gain deeper knowing about your life and the world around you and the people in it. And that's really what the fifth season does. It's a book that empowers us to be where we are in the moment. And I imagine that's why maybe many of you are here this Sunday to join us. So, Mark, again, thank you for this and all of your books. Congratulations on this publication, and especially
Oh,
thanks for inviting me to be in conversation with
oh,
you.
thank you, Brooke, and thank you for that wonderful, wonderful introduction. It's a joy to be here. And And thanks to everyone for being a part of this. And you know, Brooke, as I often say, that I don't I don't have any answers. I'm we're really comparing notes on what it is to be alive. And what I share are in, examples, not instructions, because no one knows how to do this. Um, if anyone says they do, walk away. um, but this is the most messy, magnificent, noble journey there is, to be a spirit in a body and time on earth, and to walk in that together.
Hmm. Isn't that true? And maybe it feels a little messier now than it has, in recent history. But let's start from this broad but important question. What led you to write this book?
Well, I've always, and again, as you know, I've always used my own life as a doorway or a case study for the archetypal, for the common choice points and questions that we all have to enter in being here. And since I'm now 74, when I met someone my age 20 years ago, I thought they were ancient. It doesn't seem so old now. Um, and so now that I'm in the continent of aging, it was just very natural for me to take a look at, well, what is this terrain like? What is this journey like? What's the path look like? And what are the different choice points that are arising as we do this? And also I would say that, while this is focused on the learnings from the second half of life, like when I was younger, and as many of you know, almost died from a rare form of lymphoma. Well, both aging and life-threatening conditions, and not just difficulties, but the kind of penultimate experiences of love and joy and wonder, they all bring into greater relief the spectrum of quote normal choices we all face in life. So they make these things more acute and more visible, but they apply to all of us. And I'll just say that when I was recording the audio book, I had this wonderful sound engineer from Macmillan Audio, Gina, who was 30, and as we went through the whole book together over a week, and I couldn't help but ask her about halfway in. I said, well, I know that this is focused on the second half of life, but how is all this sitting with you? And she wisely said, oh, it's really speaking to me a lot, not just because of how I can relate to my parents, but she said wisely, we're always aging, whether it's from 20 to 40, 40 to 60, or 60 to 100. So the things that have been uncovered here are helpful to anyone at any point in life, I think.
Yeah, and I'm at that stage of life where all of a sudden aging just kind of sneaks up on you, and you realize like, oh my goodness, you probably have fewer years left than behind you, and it's such an interesting realization. And I really would wanted to ask you about this title, the fifth season. Why the fifth season?
Yeah, and this is something I've saved for years, that I learned a while ago, and it comes from Chinese lore, because in the Chinese mythology, the fifth season is really first referenced as this time of year, late August, September, when the light is particularly golden and bare, and the sun sets a little bit in the sky, so that there's just a different cast to the light. And then Chinese sages quickly applied that to the life cycle, our life on earth, and said, well, that fifth season is that time of life when everything starts to integrate. We start to see patterns in our life. We live forward, but we map backward. And I can even see that, in all the books I've been blessed to bring into being. I just was writing each one about what I needed to learn next. I didn't really see any patterns. But now looking back, there are obvious patterns that have been about my own aging and growing. The Book of Awakening. Well, once awake, then I wrote The Exquisite Risk. Well, once awake, you need to learn how to take risks. And once you learn how to take risks, you need to have more courage. And I wrote Finding Inner Courage. And the next book was 7,000 Ways to Listen. Well, if you're awake and you take risks and you have courage, now you just have to listen. and on and on. And so the fifth season is this season of life where we start to shed what's unnecessary, and we look at what's matters, and we see what's clear and bare, and all of our essential experiences start to surface, and we start to weave them into a fabric. And so interestingly, the Chinese sages talked about this turn of life as the heavenly pivot,
Hmm.
which I love. And so that's why I was saving that. And actually, I wasn't really sure for what book until I realized I was going to write this book. That, oh, and that is also a sign of aging. You know, I have a chapter in there called Insights Over Time. And one thing I'll say, and then pause here, but I've learned over time that the creative process and the introspective process are really the same thing. I just happen to write it down. and and yeah, the books are the trail of that learning, but that create and this is where that creative process is really lives in us, how we gain insight over time, and of the things we've done, the things we haven't done, where we've fallen and gotten up, and it all starts to make more sense.
Well, and write it down, you do. I mean, like I said earlier, this is the 27th book, and you're so rich in story and metaphor. And so, of course, when I read your books, I just soak up these metaphors. And you have this really powerful one early in this book, using the idea of a meteor hurtling toward Earth to talk about the aging process. And I wonder if you could unpack that a little bit here for us.
Sure. And again, you know, as with my poems and with the books, I've written a lot for two reasons. One is I write about what I don't know. And if I wrote only about what I knew, I would have written very little. And again, it's a terrain for learning. And then once I retrieve what seems to be real, and true, then it becomes my teacher. And then I have to stay in conversation with it. So a metaphor like this, I didn't say, oh, well, this would be a neat metaphor to share in the book. By exploring the topic, the metaphor arrived and became a teacher for me. And so I share it with you. And so the metaphor, you know, we all know as a meteor, very few actually reach Earth. They burn up in the atmosphere along the way. And so what happens as they enter the atmosphere, they flake off more and more of their substance, their outer substance, and what they get brighter and brighter. So that's all that's left is light. And the metaphor is that this seems to be the journey of a life over a lifetime, a spirit in a body over a lifetime. That as we age, uh, we flake off more and more till we get brighter and brighter, and all that's left is light. And so the
Mm.
challenge, no one likes the flaking off, you know, as you know very well, Brooke. Literally a year ago last week, I had major back surgery, fusion back surgery, where the titanium screws are put in your back. So a
Mm.
year ago, I couldn't put my socks on. I couldn't shower by myself. My wife Susan had to help me. I was in chronic pain, and that was a flaking off for me. And that journey made me brighter and brighter, and learned even more through that. And so our one of our challenges in aging is we of course have to face the flaking off, the challenges, the physical limitations that start to appear. And how, if we don't stay open to the inner journey, those limitations will be overpowering. And we won't eliminate them. This is not about rationalizing or turning from pain to wonder. It's about staying open as well to the ever deepening and broadening experience of light,
Mm.
of all of life, because together they right size the limitations. And so we're asked to stay open to both at the same time, not to deny the suffering, not to deny the pain, you know, but at the same time to stay open to everything larger. And I can give you a very concrete example from my back journey. So, and actually, while it's like apples and oranges, there were aspects of this journey of 10 months or more of being in chronic pain that were more difficult than the catastrophe of facing cancer in my 30s. And
Mm.
my heart goes out so much to people who are locked in chronic pain. I was blessed to, through a great surgeon, find a way through. But during this time, it would take me 20 minutes. I'm in upstairs in my study. And to get upstairs here during that time, it would take me 20 minutes or so to take each step, wait for the pain to subside, do another step, and sit in this chair. And so there was no eliminating the pain or the fear and was this going to be solved and where was this going? But I had to say to myself, in facing that pain and fear, where is the nearest thing to me that's not afraid and not in pain? And very simply, it was the floor under my feet and the ceiling above me and the sky above the ceiling and the earth that is holding up the house we live in that originally was the land of the Potawatomi. And so that tribe was living on this land and all of the lessons from their spirit in how they tilled this very land that our house is built on. And so it was not turning from my pain and fear, but allowing, I had to open my heart to what's not afraid and what's not in pain so that that could still infuse my spirit while going through these things. So there's a good concrete example of what I mean by staying open to being more and more light while facing the limitations.
I so appreciate that because certainly all of us either, have these experiences of the pain and the limitations, or we know people like your young friend, the 30-year-old who was thinking about her own parents. And I think about that for myself. And, when you get into this aging and it is all about ailments and the focus starts to be truly on that. And yet in this book, you write about how essential a creative life is. And so thank you for that concrete example. But can you talk more about how you balance that, especially if you might be in pain or if you feel like you're suffering? So I guess it's just a little bit of a deepening of what you were just
Yeah.
talking about.
So what I mean by, and this the subtitle of the book is creativity in the second half of life. And it doesn't mean that, oh, now that we have more time, we need to produce great art. What what I'm exploring there is that our life becomes the work of art. And all along, while we try to achieve so many things throughout our lives, um, at least I have come to learn it's not about the achieving, that actually all the heart, all the soul wants is for us to be as alive as possible. And so it turns to our heart to throw care on the fire of the soul. And just as any actual fire doesn't care what type of wood you put on it, the soul doesn't care what type of care you put on it. It could be putting your all into stamp collecting or gardening or fixing foreign cars or, making dinner for loved ones or, journaling or writing memoir or dancing, whether it's professional or not, whatever it might be, it is our aliveness and our giving our all to that aliveness that makes our life the work of art. And so, I referenced as a wonderful story in the book, where it's a story told by a woman whose mother was a classical pianist. And she tells this story of her mother in her 80s playing every day. And one of her favorite pieces was a piece by Schubert, Franz Schubert. And her mother had terrible arthritis in her hands by this time. And so her daughter recounts this story where she says to her mother, gee, is it too painful for you to play? I mean, are you is this too hard? And her mother turns to her and says, "You think if I don't play it doesn't hurt?"
Mm.
And she says, "So playing helps me move through the hurt. And so we are always challenged, not to force, there's a balance here, not to force and say, oh, well, I'm going to push through, because there are times when it is too painful and we need to modify how much we play or what we do or how we do it. Last week my wife and I were in New York, and as you know, Brooke, I was speaking at the 92nd Street Y, and being 74, I'm well, thankfully, but I'm not walking as many, miles as I did 20 years ago when I went to New York. I'm not trying to fit everything in. I'm soaking more and more in of whatever I see. And uh, and so that's the other aspect of this, is that how we take in, as you mentioned, Brooke, we all get to a point where there's more years behind us than ahead. I'm aiming for 100, but nobody knows what's waiting. Um, but it recasts a shift in how we meet dream and memory. So, nostalgia is when we look back to an experience that was wonderful, but nostalgia is saying, oh, wouldn't it be great if I could go back there? But the true purpose of memory, whatever brought us alive in our history, is alive in us now. And so to revisit those moments is to see where that spark lives in us now. And that's the true purpose of memory, to bring us to come back to now. And the same thing with dream. So it doesn't mean because I'm 74, I stop dreaming, but it means in the same way, and I learned this from my cancer journey, you know, dreams are kindling for the fire of aliveness. And so I dream and I plan and I look forward to things like our conversation today. But that's all to see, where does that spark live in me now? So as we age, we are asked to visit the past and the future to help bring us more alive now. And that's a shift in horizons, which, as you know, is an early chapter in the book. We have to shift how we relate to the past and the future so that we can feed the work of life that is the work of art that is our life now.
Yeah, such a powerful reminder, and thank you for that. In the book, Mark, you offer what you call your profile in aging, and I wanted to ask you to speak more to that as well.
Yeah. So what I try to do, as you know, is always offer a way in to personalize what I'm exploring for our readers and our visitors, that where does it live in your life? And so it's kind of an inventory of choice points as we look at our life to consider where we are now. And so, some of those profiles, they're portals of perception, is what I would call them. And um, things like uh, things you've had to put down in your life in order to move forward, things you've needed to build again in your life in order to move forward, or your autobiography as a listener. Who taught you how to listen? How has the way you've listened over the years changed? What kind of listener were you 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and what kind of listener are you now? Um, what foundational stories remind you of who you are? I often tell a story about my grandmother, um, my father's mother, who, as a young boy, just really was so powerfully affirming of me, little Mark, um, that I really didn't have to do anything. I was enough as I am. And throughout life, I've returned to that story, especially when I've been confused or troubled, to to remind myself of who I am and of how to enter life from my life more fully. And so, I ask for all of you who are listening, how, and whether you read the book or not, to think about these things. What things have you been asked to put down that were too much to carry in order to be more alive? What foundational stories help you remind you who you are, and tell those stories. Tell those stories. What have you needed to build more than once to come true? One of the things about dreams that we discover as we age, I know I have, is that, it matters to put our all into what we dream, but our dreams are basically guesses. That, when we dream something finally and we feel like we have a purpose or a call, we make them so sacred that they're like, carved in stone ahead of us, and that if we veer in any way or don't get there, we think we're failures. Well, I've discovered over time, for me at least, that dreams mostly they're kindling for the fire of aliveness, and often they don't come true, but by giving our all to them, sometimes we come true, and that's more important. So where are you in your journey of coming true in the second half of life?
Great question. Mark, in the description for today, there was a promise to speak to the rhythms of aging, and that resonated with me so much. And of course, in the book, you write about the constricting and expanding rhythms. Could you talk more about that particular exploration?
Yeah. So, and again, these are just field notes. They're not how-tos, they're field notes from my own experiences now in the last 10, 15 years and going forward. Well, I think the first rhythm of aging is that most of us, the structures of our lives uh, provide us with automatic connection, whether it's work, family, travel, you know, going to school. And and of course, as we age, as we quote retire, or as we move out of full-time employment, or we move out of formal education, those structures go away. So the first thing we have to do is it requires more initiation on our part, more conscious effort to stay more in contact with life. So don't, you know, instead of reading at home alone, go to a cafe. Even if you don't talk to anybody, make sure your solitude is around other people. you know we also, this insulation that starts to happen if we don't do that, all of a sudden, simple things, uh you got to call the plumber this week. All of a sudden it's like a big threshold to cross. It's just a phone call, but we all experience that. Oh, well, I'll do it tomorrow. All of a sudden it becomes big. And so we are required new skills as we age, and one is to break our inertia.
Mhm.
Now, there's a benefit from stillness, and there's a benefit from sitting and being quiet, because it brings us into the deepening and the light, and how we become more and more light, and to the depth of connection. So that helps us, but we still live in the world. And so we have to, whatever our solitude is, whether it's a room or an apartment or a home, we have to make sure that ring of solitude blurs with the ring of community. And we have to make work, uh, put our effort into that. I think another rhythm that we find as we age, which has to do with our health, and I've had from, oh my God, having almost died in my 30s. I think as I look back since then, I had a blessed curse of, ever since then, I was always 8 and 80 at the same time, you know, and Part of me felt the fragility of life and felt, well, why make plans when everything is so uncertain all the time? But of course, we need to make plans. And, as Winston Churchill, I loved, said, planning is essential, but plans are useless. And so this other thing starts to happen where, um, you know, every sensation that comes along that's different physically is not a problem. It's not to be pathologized. And I experienced for many years because of my cancer journey, if anything was different, I went, uh-oh, what's wrong? And so unconsciously for decades, I was like, if nothing happens, I'm okay. And if something happens, uh-oh. And I've learned as I've, entered my 70s, I can't continue to live like that because we become old trees creaking. And every creak is not a problem. It's just the wind moving through us. And we'll drive ourselves crazy if we don't open to that rhythm. And so there's another corollary rhythm, which there's a section in the book or a chapter called Everything or Nothing. And this is, when we're young, I bruise, I bump into something, a corner, and I get a black and blue mark on my leg, and I don't think anything about it, and I keep going. Well, now, I see a black and blue mark on my leg, and I don't remember bumping it, and I go, uh-oh, is this nothing or everything? Is it a blood clot? Is it this? Is it that? Or is it just a bump? And so we have to not, part of the rhythm of life is not falling in the rabbit hole that we encounter is everything, because it's often nothing.
Mhm.
And how do we stay? So I think, and again, this is an accentuated rhythm, but it really is a rhythm throughout our lives, is how do we return to the corridor of aliveness when we bounce to one extreme and the other? What are the practices, experiences, and relationships that help us return to the corridor of aliveness? And so this centers on this central paradox of living that all along, but especially in aging, is that no one can live my life for me, and I can't do it alone. So even though I've learned all these things, there are still days I wake up and I may be hooked by my fear or the uncertainty, and even though I know better, I've got to call you up and say, I'm stuck. Help.
Those powerful images too there, Mark. I'm going to ask this final question and then we'll move into the reading. And before I ask it, I just want to say to folks, as you're listening to the reading and all of this, do pop your questions in because the end of this whole session is Q&A, which I will relay to Mark, and I'll look forward to that. But Mark, in terms of the closing question here, before we get to your readings, what's your hope for anyone here who is engaging with this book? And I do want to say, if you love listening to Mark speak as I do, even though I had already read the book, I listened to the audio and it's just perfect. And so I
No.
know audiobooks are increasingly popular these days. So I did just want to put a plug in for that as well.
Oh, thank you, Brooke. And I think, as with all my books, my hope is that something here will be honest company for you in your journey, that it will help, just as my teaching circles. I hope there's something in my writing, whether it's poems or these books, that will help introduce you to your own gifts and your own wisdom, and will help you personalize your own journey in the fifth season of life. Will help you uh, become more intimate in your own rhythms and in inhabiting the rhythms of life more fully, and that you will share that what you discover with others, because no one can do it alone.
Hmm. Beautiful. I'll be back for
Oh,
Q&A, Mark. Thank you for
oh,
that.
thank you, Brooke. Thank you so much. And thank you all again for being on this journey today. And so what I want to do is offer some poems, stories, as a way to open us to this holy terrain. Um, And so let me begin. And this is, and again, as I said, all of these are become teachers for me. So I want to share what I've been learning and just let them touch you as they will. Bookmark things that might speak to you for questions, but also to be with in conversation after today. So the first is just a couple of lines that I'm working with that came to me. Um, they're not even in a poem yet, but they clearly are a teacher. And these lines are: being hardened will help us get through life, but being softened will let us experience life. Being hardened will help us get through life, but being softened will let us experience life. So the first poem, this is a poem that speaks about my grandma Minnie, who I mentioned in talking with Brooke. And this is called Never Lost, Always Found. And many of the poems I'm reading today are in the Half Life of Angels, um, which is a book that gathers poems from my 60s, my 50s and 60s, and the beginning of turning 70. Never lost, always found. On the darkest night of the year, Susan asks about Grandma Minnie yet again. And again, I soften and speak of being a child in your Brooklyn kitchen, sitting next to your stove as you made latkes, patting the excess oil and giving them to me while they were warm. And Susan jumps up as she does every year, as if for the first time, and starts grating potatoes. I put on klezmer music and we make latkes and eat standing in the kitchen. Our dog jumps to the music or to the presence of something unseen. I grab her paws and we dance briefly to the music of the old world. And that's also a foundational story for me. My grandma making latkes for me as a little boy in her Brooklyn kitchen. We all have these foundational stories, and they're there again, not just to reminisce, but so we can remember who we are and what matters as we face difficulty and turbulence in our days. This poem is called Halfway Up, and it's about um, my younger self or myself in midlife meeting my older self. I was hiking up the mountain because I was tired of the world. I wanted to live on the summit. It was a steep and winding path. About halfway up, I met my future older self who was coming down. We spent the night around a fire. And after a long silence, he said, "Nothing I can say will keep you from this climb, but you will see that we are meant to live in the world." I was honestly disappointed and I defied his truth. He knew I would resist. He sighed and took my hand and whispered, "Go and see for yourself. You can't hide on the top. You must carry the summit in your heart. Go and see for yourself. You can't hide on the top. You must carry the summit in your heart." And this next poem is called Back to Earth. They say after the gods tried everything in search of happiness, tried being a horse with wings, or a one-eyed giant, or a king who could turn everything to gold, they say they landed quite by accident with their feet in the earth, their hands in the river, their face in the light. They say they thought, how could we have missed this? So, one thing I have kept learning through these years is that there's nowhere to go. There is no there, there's only here. Of course, we travel many places from here to there. Many of you we've met at different retreat centers or and we've traveled to be there. But once we're there, we uncover and open the same eternal moment. We discover again that there's nowhere to go. That life really is a journey not from here to there, but from in to out. So it's always humbling how the simplest things reveal deep lessons. So this is what happened this spring. Every spring I clean our gas grill, our outside grill, to make use of it again. And so you'll see where this goes. Um, and it wasn't so easy to clean this year. And of course, it led to a lesson. Spring cleaning. Our gas grill wouldn't light. I tried everything. So I ordered a new set of igniter coils. Well, it took a few weeks to come. Then an hour or so to take the grill apart and fumble my way to remove the old and set up the new. It still wouldn't light. I was getting frustrated. Then Susan came home and asked, "Did you check if the gas is turned on?" Well, it wasn't. I was sure I had turned it on, but no. And though I felt stupid, I later wondered how many ways we poke and prod the life around us and look to replace what doesn't work in our lives, when all we need is to make sure our switch is turned on. I wondered how many ways we poke and prod the life around us and look to replace what doesn't work in our lives, when all we need is to make sure our switch is turned on. How often we think the relationships or the work we're doing or the expectations we have or the path we're on doesn't work, when we've got to really make sure our switch is turned on. This poem is called Befriending Life. You say you are lonely. Well, I have been lonely. You say you are trapped behind a wall that no one can see. I have fogged my breath against such a wall. You say everything looks gray. I have lived at times with such a cataract over my heart. But after being thrown off the cliff that appeared for me as cancer, I am still here, and something was removed between me and life. And ever since, I can no longer hesitate. I feel you and I say I love you. I see the dog and kiss the dog. I see something break and try to fix it. When the sun parts the clouds, I am urged to part the clouds that gather around me. I know we can't will such a change. All I can offer is don't hesitate. So what wants to live in you can live. So the next few poems I want to share, I want to demonstrate how, and again, this is where the creative life and the introspective life are really the same thing. So this requires that we constantly process our own experience so we can clear ourselves out, so we can be open to other experience than our own around us and even throughout history and time. So the first poem is one of self reflection, and then you'll see the other poems that I'll share about this. So this poem is called Life Tracks, like railroad tracks, life tracks. My mother taught me how to build a wall. My father showed me how to climb it. They never said so, but they loved the wall and called it home. In time, I grew like a chick in its shell. Inevitably, I cracked the wall to live my life. They never forgave me. Let me read that one again. Life tracks. My mother taught me how to build a wall. My father showed me how to climb it. They never said so, but they loved the wall and called it home. In time, I grew like a chick in its shell. Inevitably, I cracked the wall to live my life. They never forgave me. So this is a geography of our lives written. I couldn't have written this 20, 30 years ago. But now that they're both gone, I can see more the things they needed to do and the things I needed to do. And so I'm able to write this pretty much without judgment after all these years and to understand the dynamics of our lives. And so that really helped clear me out. And so this next poem is about an old samurai um, who gave up fighting. And I don't think I would be open to someone else's experience if I hadn't faced and processed my own. So this is called Swordless. They say the old samurai, tired of being on guard, gave his sword away. It took months to accept a life without armor, months to let his wounds turn into blossoms. In time, he took to long walks along the river where he would sit alone and play the one-stringed koto. Sought out by a young soldier, the former hero listened into dusk and simply said, I have looked my whole life for the one string. When the would-be warrior asked about greatness, the swordless samurai replied, understanding life is like tossing a scarf in the air and watching it drape to the ground. Understanding life is like tossing a scarf in the air and watching it drape its way to the ground. So here is another example. After clearing my own life's experience, I was open to the life of this swordless samurai decades, centuries ago. And retrieving this image of the scarf draping its way to the ground, it felt instantly true to me. But honestly, I'm still not sure what it means. And every time I read it, I have to stay in conversation so I can better understand the truth of this image. So here's a poem about the power and healing of all story. It's called How to Get By. During the last hurricane, I saw neighbors on the news passing sandbags in a line to build a wall against the storm. And that night, I dreamt of our ancestors passing their stories of wonder and pain like sandbags from generation to generation to give us something to stand behind in the storms to come. So when you feel that all you're going through is for nothing, lift your story like a sandbag and pass it on. It will do more good than you can know. So, one of my mentors and teachers, who's now an ancestor, is Joel Elkes, who was a child of the Holocaust, who was a preeminent doctor, one of the fathers in the 1950s of the field of psychopharmacology, a lifelong watercolorist. And I met Joel when he was 80 and wondered how many years we would have, and he lived to be 102. And I was teaching again in New York City when he died. This is about 10 years or so, maybe 12 years ago now. And so I learned while sitting in Bryant Park, where I visited again last week, one of my favorite places, when I learned that he had passed. And so this poem came to me in that moment, and it's called Where Are You? And interesting now that I've published a book on aging, that he was a great teacher to me about aging. Where are you? My teacher appeared to me in the midst of my grief for him. I was on a bench in a park in the city. Buses were coughing by and small shops were opening. And since my teacher no longer has hands, he swept a bird in my face to break up my sadness. And since he no longer has a mouth, the light off the windows 20 stories up drifted through the leaves. I said, I miss you already. And I thought I heard him say, do everything while you're here. Then it began to mist, though the sun was shining, as if the universe were crying at what it does to us in order to keep going. Just then a child lost a ball. It bounced my way. Now my teacher was in the bounce, and I thought I heard him say, enough of this, pick up the ball and live. And I can hear Joel even now say that. Enough of this, pick up the ball and live. And he would have said that. He definitely would have said that. So again, to go back to the beginning two lines of this sharing, getting through life, hardening up to harden will help us get through life, but to soften will help us live life. So this is a poem about softening, and anyone who's been in a long time relationship knows that the realness of it, no matter how well you get along, there were always moments when you hit each other's buttons and you bump into each other and you stop hearing each other and you have these arguments that flare and go away and you wonder what on earth were we arguing about. So this is such a moment with Susan and I called the argument. The slow rain fills everything today, clearing the throat of the bird on the deck and swelling the roots of the locusts we planted years ago. The way truth outlasting our argument softened my tongue, and I confessed to all the things I was afraid to say. And repaired, we went to the beach where high tide took my shoes, and I was forced to go barefoot all the way home, as if life were insisting that I slow down and go naked. And the next day, I couldn't hold up my image of myself anymore. And you loved what you saw anyway. This is the blessing of deep and long term love. I couldn't hold up my image of myself anymore, and you loved what you saw anyway. And this is also the reward of moving into a more authentic stage of life. We begin to put things down. We begin to put things down. One of the interesting things in the Japanese tradition of the holy tea ceremony is that the entrance to the tea hut is low and small, so that you have to kneel and bow to enter it, and you can't carry anything extraneous. You have to leave whatever is extraneous or what you're wearing. Typically, a general who would visit a tea master back in the 1600s would have to put his sword and his armor to the side in order to enter the tea hut. I think that is the doorway to wisdom, is like that tea hut. This poem is called Over the Ridge. Arriving in this life, we want for nothing other than food and warmth and simply to be held. Then the journey begins to reach, grab, fall, let go, to break and be broken, to rub our scars from trying to hold light, to reach again, to fall again. And after breaking trail, after being cut by brush, after tripping on boulders, after going back for loved ones, we finally look down at where we've been and finally look up. And here's the fork in the road to an entire life. Do we focus on the difficulty of the climb or the magnificence of the view? For me, I honored the climb and praised the view, and was somehow returned to wanting only warmth and only to being held. So it is not about achieving greatness, but about being humbled into the great chance to be. And this poem is called Somehow. I was all worked up, triggered by fear, and you simply listened. And then, like a dragonfly touching the face of a lake, you put your hand on my heart. And somehow your care brought me back to the stillness that waits under everything. I don't know how to thank you other than to put my hand on the heart of everything wherever I go. And this is one way of loving it forward. And this small poem, which I'll read twice, is called Like That. I can't take away your pain or save you from your life. But holding the one who is suffering is the only raft we have. Putting your palm on the surface of a lake, you can feel the entire lake. Compassion is like that. Like that. I can't take away your pain or save you from your life. But holding the one who is suffering is the only raft we have. Putting your palm on the surface of a lake, you can feel the entire lake. Compassion is like that. And this kind of reflection, which is just a couple of paragraphs, this is an example of going back to something in the past, but looking not nostalgically, but looking for where it lives in me now. This is called To Dream and Welcome. Whenever someone comes to our house, whether friends or the plumber, I always look for them and go out to greet them. My anticipation always stirs our dog to go to the window, and Susan asks if I'm anxious. Well, sometimes I am, but after all these years, I had a memory of being a boy, visiting my grandparents in Baldwin, New York, and Pop would do the same. Now, when I'm older than he was, I have this flash of him jumping up before the doorbell rang, saying with excitement, "Someone's coming. We must welcome them." And I can see now that even without a conscious memory of this, his endless welcome taught me this basic gesture of heart. For this is how I welcome the unknown, how I welcome the poems, how I welcome you and the stories beyond my experience, how I even reluctantly meet hardship. I've always had a reflex of welcome. And this fleeting memory of Pop jumping up to greet someone on the stoop is one of the myths that has shaped me and shaped my life. One that has helped me move through fear. It's one of those foundational stories. For the vow to welcome always helps us open the door of fear to meet the day. It's how I welcome beauty on the other side of suffering, how I welcome wisdom beyond the door of my own small opinions. For wisdom waits like a buried treasure in all we bring up from the deep as we hoist it through our heart into the world. This is one of the enduring purposes of poetry and friendship. For true poetry is a lasting friend, and a true friend is pure poetry. And this foundational story, this ground uh, of welcome, has opened me only in the last month or so to realize that I do want to explore a book about the art of welcome. And so I invite you, I give you a question to walk with after today. Can you tell one story about your history of welcome? How you have welcomed others along the way, and how you have been welcomed. And what have you learned from this? So here I want to tell a story. Um, and this, sometimes the stories just happen, and all we have to do is honestly record them and then work with their wisdom. So, one of the places that I do love to visit and teach is the Modern Elder Academy, which has two campuses, one in Santa Fe, but the original campus is on the Pacific Ocean in on the very bottom of the Baja in Mexico. And the last time I was there, I spent a wonderful week there, and I'll be there again next February. Um, Actually, doing a week long journey with 20 to 30 souls around this book, the fifth season. But on the way back from there last February, I was at the Los Cabos airport, which is huge, like Miami, hundreds of people going in all directions. And you'll see this happened in a beautiful, deep exchange with Enrique, who was a gate agent. This is called the Sage of Los Cabos. Boarding a plane in Los Cabos, I noticed the gate agent's ring and heard myself whisper, "Oh my God, that's so beautiful." Well, Enrique dropped everything and took it off while everyone was waiting, hundreds of people behind us. And the ring was a coiled silver dragon with a red jewel in its mouth. Enrique said, "My father gave it to me." He started to well up. I leaned in, and despite everyone waiting, he went on deeply. He said, "My father took me to him, and he said, 'My magnificent boy, the dragon outside will kill you, and the one inside will save you. Wear this so you can know the difference.'" Enrique slipped the ring back on. Everyone behind us was impatient. I had to board the plane, and I never saw him again. As I sat on the plane, it felt like generations of knowing had surfaced in that moment, from Enrique to his father, to whatever experiences through the ages have led to the understanding that there's a confusing territory between being devoured by life and being saved by life. And we are ever challenged to discern what is life giving and what is life draining. What will let our gifts emerge and what will slowly diminish us? Which dragon do you see out the window? Which in the back of your eye? And so from this holy moment with this amazing gate agent Enrique, and there is an example of one, as we age, we look for the dragon that will save us more than our fear of the dragon that will kill us. And also as we age, we are challenged to find the courage in the midst of hundreds of people waiting. This moment only happened because I involuntarily gasped at the beautiful ring I'd never seen. And he said, "I don't care who's waiting. My father gave me that ring, and I'm going to tell you what it's about." And we resisted the press of people around us and slipped into a moment of eternity that has stayed with me as a teacher. Powerful. So, this next poem, I have a handful here that will bring us to our question time. This is also a poem about my dear father, who I loved dearly, and I did learn many things. He was a creative force. I learned much from him. But he also wasn't the model. I didn't have a model of the kind of man I wanted to be emotionally or inwardly. And I've learned about him again, especially since he's passed. And this poem recently came called Hard to Stay Hard. It took 80 years, but my father finally softened. One day, the castle door I had knocked on since a teenager was left open. And there he was, slouching at a table, his face lifted to the one patch of light, slipping through the turret of his stubbornness. I rushed and took his hand to confess, "Oh, Father, I would have loved you even more." Let me read that one again. Hard to stay hard. It took 80 years, but my father finally softened. One day, the castle door I had knocked on since a teenager was open, and there he was, slouching at a table, his face lifted to the one patch of light slipping through the turret of his stubbornness. I rushed and took his hand to confess, "Oh, Father, I would have loved you even more." And this poem is called, I think I have a couple more here. This poem, this poem is about death. You know, we all have such fear of death, and I have a chapter in the book, Our Conversation with Death. But back in my 30s when I almost died from a rare form of lymphoma, I didn't have a near death experience where I crossed over and came back. But I had an experience near death, and 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 during that time, I felt life and death as inextricably linked. We talk about life, we talk about death to better understand them, but in that moment, I felt like they were Siamese twins, offering us great lessons. And so this is a poem about death, our conversation with death, called The Party of Your Life. Always invite death to your table, but never let him choose the meal. Give him plenty of wine, he only pretends to keep secrets. Be sure to listen past the drama, he will try to make it all about you. But once it gets late and he stops spinning tales, once everyone leaves, he will grow quiet as a lake under the stars. Look him in the eye then, and he will mirror the mysteries of life. Be kind to him, for he is lonely too. But never let him stay over. Keep him warm, but call him a cab. So again, the unexpected insight in that poem that I didn't know before I entered it was, after everyone leaves, he will grow quiet as a lake under the stars. Look him in the eye then, and he will mirror the mysteries of life. Death isn't just the end of everything, it is the mirror of everything. So let me share um, two more poems here, and then we'll open this up to some questions uh, from you. And please don't hesitate to share anything with Brooke that we can look at together. This poem is called The Blessed Work. When, when I was young, I imagined a world much better than this. Looking for it, though, I broke many things and fell down many times, blaming this world, blaming you, blaming myself. But through the years, I lost things I thought were important, and I lost things that were important and was suffered free of coverings. Now I can see the luminous world is always right here, and the blessed work is to part the veils and walk quietly in the miracle. And finally, this poem, which is the title poem of my first volume of 3 books of poems, which came out from Sounds True in 2016, I think, The Way Under the Way. And I mentioned The Half-Life of Angels is the next collection of 3 volumes of poems, which recently came out in the last year or so. The Way Under the Way. For all that has been written, for all that has been read, we are led to this instant where one of us will speak and one of us will listen, as if no one has ever placed an oar into that water. It doesn't matter how we come to this. We may jump to it or be worn to it because of great pain or a sudden raw feeling that this is all very real. It may happen in a parking lot when we break the eggs in the rain, or watching each other in our grief. But here we will come with very little left in the way. When we meet like this, I may not have the words, so let me say it now. Nothing compares to the sensation of being alive in the company of another. It is God breathing on the embers of our soul. And thank you for listening. And please, Brooke, I welcome you back on and welcome your questions that we can have some more time together.
So beautiful, Mark. Thank you. And yeah, please, everyone, bring your questions, which Zach will cut and paste. I know from listening to Mark's events over so many years that you can sometimes fall into a trance-like state, and then all of a sudden it's Q&A. And so a very immediate question, Mark, is where can someone find the argument? Which book is that in?
Oh, the argument. You know what? Um, it's not published yet, but
Okay.
I can send that to you and Zach, and I'm happy to share it. Don't post it. You're free to share it. Yeah, thank you so much. You make a note
Thanks
of
for
that.
that, Mark. Wonderful. So Jen had asked a question earlier about if there's some kind of virtual group or writing workshop that you do, and specific to this book, no. But I'll just say, because I manage a lot of Mark's schedule from time to time, please check out his various sites. That's marknepo.com, where he posts every single event. There's all kinds of stuff going on. So I'll put that in the chat for Zach, but I want to make sure that people who are engaged in this know that Mark is doing
Yeah,
in person and online.
thank you, Brooke, and thank you, Jen. And so when we get to the end, and I'll mention a few different ways we might be able to work together if that speaks to you when we get to a last 5 minutes or so.
Okay, beautiful. Yeah, we'll save some time for that. From Tammy, this is funny. People are asking where to find various poems, but also I think this question about the wall, um, and how did this influence? Well, it's asking about your parenting, and you don't have children, but you have
Yeah.
godchildren. How does it influence, the way that you interact with people that you're mentoring or your godchildren?
Yeah, and I think it also speaks to, and obviously I'm not a parent, so I may not be good at, but I was a child, as you can see, so I have some experience. Um, but I think it also speaks to the health of our relationships in whatever form they are. You know, I think that what I learned over time is, we all go through a journey of individuation. And what that means is, how do we discover who we are and which inheritances speak to us directly that we want to continue, whether it's from a culture, from a tradition, from parents, from friends, and which inheritances actually muffle who we are. That's the real work beyond obeying and rebelling. That's the real work of individuation. And so it was poignant that I discovered for me after years after my parents were gone that, the very things that they relied on were things I needed to break from. And that was very difficult. Um, it doesn't mean, in our instance, it was difficult to bridge that gap. It doesn't mean that gap is unbridgeable. That was just my experience. I think that we can uh, work to, and this goes for teachers as well as parenting. My deep commitment as a lifelong teacher is not to direct any of the people I'm blessed to travel with um, in how they will grow. That is ultimately presumptuous, just as it's presumptuous for a parent to determine how a child will grow. Yes, we want to model the things we value. We want to model how to be in the world. But where we go with that, I have learned, so I've accepted after a lifetime of teaching that you can't change anyone. So what am I doing? Well, what my notion of what it is to be a teacher has evolved. I think we're asked as parents and teachers and friends, soul friends, to be like greenhouses, to provide warmth and light so that who and what's before us can grow as they are meant to grow, not as how we want them to grow. And so that, is how do we support that? And I know you know this, Brooke, because I've mentioned it, but Ivan Illich, who was a great sociologist in the 60s, he was interviewed as he was aging at the end of his life. And he spoke about spiritual hospitality as helping another cross a threshold. That means lying down and being a bridge. That's beautiful. I love that. That speaks to the work of a teacher, a parent, a soul friend. And I think uh, it speaks to the deep work of true government. but but I think it doesn't say that I'm going to qualify that or that I'm going to uh, help you cross the threshold if I approve of the threshold you want to cross. You know, my parents, it with goodwill. You know, my father was a master woodworker. My mother was a thwarted secret writer who was a bookkeeper. And, you know, my mother wanted me to be a lawyer. My father wanted me to be an architect. Um, I came home, I was the first in my family to go to college. And I came home in my beginning of my sophomore year, declaring with enthusiasm that I was a poet, even though I hadn't written anything yet. You can imagine their chagrin. Um, but I've actually, you know, kept the heart of both my parents' creativity alive by becoming who I am.
Hmm. Thank you, Mark. Well, Aubrey asks, what has been the greatest challenge in letting your life be a creative act in this later stage?
Well, I think the greatest challenge, and this has been the key to my being prolific, is to learning how to get out of the way, how to, as I mentioned during the reading, how to process to face what is mine to face so that I can be a clear vessel for all of life. And again, this is not reserved for artists or writers or painters or philosophers. This is the work of introspection. This is the work of self-awareness. We are all challenged to work with ours so we can clean our eyes, our ears, our heart. You know, the paradox is I need to become as thoroughly myself as possible so I can be open to all that is not me.
Perfectly said.
Oh,
There in in the poem "The Party of Your Life," there was a point of clarification, or maybe just a deepening. You
yeah,
say about death, "Look him in the eye, then, and he will mirror the mysteries of life."
yeah.
And someone was asking about that phrase specifically, this idea of death as a mirror.
Yeah. So again, that was the insight that I didn't know when I entered the poem, that I was rewarded because I stayed with it. So the image is that, like a lake that goes still, it mirrors the stars and the heavens and the universe. So that death, when we look into the entirety, which again, death doesn't mean that life stops happening, it means that is where we stop happening as we know it. And if we look at that totality beyond or along with our fear, it will mirror, like the lake mirrors the stars, the rest of life. You know, we don't have time to get into it, but let me just say briefly this in the Carlos Castaneda beautiful book, Journey to Ixtlan, Ixtlan. Carlos, who is a very bright doctoral student, is against his will made an apprentice to a Native American, a Yaqui Indian sorcerer, Don Juan. And in the first adventures of being a forced apprentice, they're sleeping at the foot of a mesa, a huge cliff. In the middle of the night, Don Juan kicks Carlos awake, says, "Mountain lion, run." Mountain lions coming. They scale this 30-foot cliff, spend the rest of the night on top, and in the morning they wake up and Carlos says, "I don't know how to scale a cliff." how did I do this? And Don Juan says, death is always an advisor over your left shoulder to advise you how to live. Don't get hypnotized. So another image of look to death, but keep looking forward into life. And we all have to keep learning what all this means.
So true. You know, Mark, so many of your poems, start with these kind of amazing passages. And someone was commenting about the poem like that says, I can't take away your pain or save you from your life. And while there's not really a question there, what came to me was, how do you enter in? You know, like, do you listen for that line, or what does that
Ah,
feel like?
well, and again, this is the parallel with introspection. I still my heart and open it as much as I can, and then I follow what rings true, whether it's a detail out my study window, whether it's a piece of conversation I overhear in a cafe, whether it's a question that's troubling me, a fear, a story that won't let me go. And then I begin to express it as truthfully as possible, and then see what's there. And so I feel in like the work is really being an inner explorer, not making up, oh, how can I turn this into a good poem?
Mm.
Following the thread of truth, the thread of authenticity, even if it's things I'm afraid of or don't want to hear. So like, yeah, and what that opening insight leads to is that certainly in the outer physical world, you know, if you fall down, I can help you up. If you're bleeding, I can help put a band-aid. You know, my wife Susan so helped me during my back surgery. But inwardly, this is what opens us to the true work of compassion. Inwardly, I can't take your pain away. Inwardly, I can't save you from your life. But the word compassion literally means to be with. And so, therefore, love means I am signing up to be with your joy and your pain, to keep you honest company.
Mm.
But I can't take it away from you. I can't take it away from you. And this is where where compassion is not a spectator sport.
No kidding. Yeah. Well, Tammy had a question for you about how to stay inspired. She specifically asks you, and you were sharing about your back pain. How
Mm.
do you stay inspired? How did you stay inspired despite physical and emotional pain?
Well, you know, this, and I can share, this is where the journey, and I've written a whole book, as you know, Drinking from the River of Light, about the whole journey of the life of expression is a healing agent and resource, regardless of whether we create anything from it or not. And both with my back and earlier with my cancer journey, you know, I started before my cancer journey, and I fell into that journey in my early 30s. And you know, before that, I was a driven young artist, and I was so hoping that if I worked hard enough, maybe I'd write one or two great poems. You know, well, then all of a sudden I was in the hospital, turned upside down, inside out. Forget great poems. I needed to discover true expressions that would help me to tomorrow. And now in my 70s, I just want to be the poem.
Mm.
And in during this last year with my back surgery, I didn't make my way up to my study to keep producing work. It was inner medicine. I needed to sit here so I could be grounded enough to right size the chronic pain. It wasn't about producing anything. It was about staying in the inlet of expression that lets the ocean of being be a resource to us.
That's beautiful, Mark. That's the end of the questions. I wanted, if I could, maybe, and then we'll kind of go to the end. You know, what you just were saying, and what Tammy's question was sort of getting into as well, is that I think there are people who fixate on everything that is going wrong as they age, and that you're not as capable as you were, and that everything is going downhill and the end is in sight. And then there's another group of people I see, you know, who, as you said, kind of go with the rhythms and are curious and interested. And I wonder if you see that yourself, and if you ever think about, like, you know, working to align one way or the other, or just kind of being with what is.
I really feel like I'm being trying to be in these rhythms that I'm discovering as fully as as possible, so
Yeah.
that my life can be the work of art, and and engaging in this creativity, which is how I've always learned, is what keeps me deeply centered and fully alive. You know, of course, when I was young, I I worried, would I ever finish a book? Well, I'm not worried about that now. I just want to stay in the center of the stream.
Hmm. Thank you,
Yeah.
Mark.
Oh, thank you, Brooke. Thank you so much. And let me just share a couple of things here about um, in January, on our, my website and live.marknepo.com, Brooke and I will be offering a 3-week webinar on this book, the fifth season, and this topic in January. You can register to there. I did mention that in among the things that I'm doing in person, also you can register on my website at the Modern Elder Academy. I'll be doing a week. Actually, it's the first week in March this next year, not February, when I'll be doing a week journey with 20 to 30 souls around this topic. And the other thing I would mention, and Brooke helps me with this, is that I do offer year-long journeys here in Michigan, where I live, for small groups, 16 souls, where we actually
Mm.
travel a year together. We go through 4 weekends over a year doing this work together. And the journey is, which you have to plan for, obviously, to be a part of, if it's right for you. Uh, Next year's journeys are now available to register. There are 2 groups of the same journey. There's been wonderfully enough interest, and you can find those on my website, and also at live.marknepo.com if they should speak to you. Again, thank you so much, Brooke, and thank you, Zach and Book Passage.
Thank you both so much. It's really such a joy to get to spend time with you and to listen to you talk. And every time we do this, I take away so many new things, and it's just so, I feel so privileged to get to learn from someone who's really experienced so much in life, and to hear your wisdom is so special. So thank you for doing this. And thank you everyone for watching and listening. And those links that Mark talked about are in the chat. And there's also some links to their Substacks as well, where you can find both of the writings of Mark and Brooke. So thank you everyone for spending this time with us, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much. Bye everyone.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye. Thank you.